So I'm joined today by Rayana Grace, who is the program officer at the Island Foundation. Island Foundation is a tremendous supporter of PACE, whether it's our fuel assistance program or youth build program, which relies heavily on Island Foundation support. There's a lot of overlap between your mission and what we do here, so we're really thankful for that and grateful for that. You've been there for over a year now?
Yeah, just over a year. I started last January, and not to just say that because I work there, but similar to your experience working with PACE, even prior to being on board with the Island Foundation, I feel like their mission has aligned with so much of the work I've done. Almost everywhere I've worked was supported by Island at some point. And so I think it's just funny that my path led me there. I guess not surprising though, given the work that Island does. And I specifically manage our New Bedford portfolio, which includes basic needs, community development, youth, arts and culture, and then our women and girls portfolio as well, which covers maternal health, prenatal, postpartum care, access for different types of advocacy, government work, economic stability. So
I love it.
Yeah.
So there's no secret why PACE and Island would have a great relationship. And before that, you were at the Community Foundation.
Yes.
So you've gotten like 2/3 of the New Bedford philanthropic organizations checked off, right?
I know, yeah. And working in philanthropy has, I think coming from the nonprofit world and transitioning to philanthropy just really helps having that mindset where I know what it was like being on the other side of writing those grants or having to talk to funders, and it really influences my perspective and my actions as a funder to try to be transparent, to be accessible, even if we can't support you with funding in one way. Maybe there's indirect support, whether it's sharing other resources and opportunities, maybe sending an article your way, connecting you with someone. So I think that by working in nonprofits and knowing what it's like to have to navigate that world, I try to do my best to help, again, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I think there's a huge value in that, especially in we think of ourselves as a big city, but in a lot of ways, the nonprofit sector and the philanthropic sector here are like all the same people, and we all know each other.
Yes.
We're not in that greater Boston philanthropic world as much as sometimes we wish we were.
Yes.
Because we'd have more places to take our ideas to be funded.
Yes.
But sometimes, like on the flip side, right? You might feel sometimes like you wish you had more organizations to work with to advance the interests of Island Foundation, right? Which is you have a geographic focus, right?
Yeah, we do have a geographic focus, and it's funny because sometimes we'll get asks from Boston, Greater Boston, and I always say that's not who we serve. We're committed to being in this area, and we do some Rhode Island and Maine, but we're southeastern Massachusetts, and so there are some towns and cities that might reach out to us, and we have to decline based on geography. But it's really important, especially to the board and for the founders, that we focus in this area. And for part of that is what you just stated, that the Boston region just has such a breadth of philanthropic support, and we're all connected through some different types of organizations, like Philanthropy Massachusetts. That is an organization that it's a membership organization of different funders from throughout the state, and so we're able to advocate for our grantees, and we get calls like that. We have some funders who New Bedford is getting more and more on their radar, and so they'll reach out to us and say, I'm looking for someone who's working in this area. Who are the key players? And so we really try to work with our grantees to connect them. We'll actually be collaborating on a site visit later in June for some Boston area funders to come for a program. So
great.
We're always trying to bring it down, bring it closer to home.
That's cool. One of the things I think you guys do really well is sort of keep your finger on the pulse of like the needs of the community, right? And how they adapt and change over time. So whether it's like food insecurity or something else, I know we've had a lot of conversations over the years about that stuff. And that's one of the things we do here too. So as part of our funding, we do these community assessments every few years. And I think one of the biggest topics that brings us to the table today is talking about housing. And so the last 2 times we've done that assessment, the number one need that we found is housing.
Yes.
And housing's a big topic, but if you dig into it a little further, it's housing that people can afford, so it's the cost of it. Maybe in 2017 we had more of this than we did recently, but there was talk about like housing quality. So there was a lot of code issues and health violations and unsafe sort of like slumlord kept properties. Now I feel like a lot of people are like accepting of not great living conditions as long as they can afford to live there. But rents have just gone crazy in the city. What have you seen on that?
It's funny because I talk about this a lot, both at work and personally, because I know on the personal side, I know so many people working full-time jobs, good paying jobs that just still either can't afford or can't even find a place to not afford. It's just like the supply is so low in this area. People who want to stay in New Bedford, who have family and friends here, want to support the region and just cannot find a place. An application opens up and there's hundreds of people applying for the same apartment, a simple apartment, like you said, and not, I don't want to say like a bad apartment, but nothing super spectacular about it. In an average neighborhood, there just seems to be such a lack of amount of housing for people to live in. And it's frustrating because on the one hand, we want people to stay here. We always have this conversation about bringing talent back to New Bedford or keeping talent in New Bedford, retaining who we have. We get these amazing people who graduate from all the different high schools and we want you to start businesses. We want you to go to college and come back or go to college in the region. It's like, where are you expecting people to stay? Where are you expecting people to grow their families and really be able to have a fruitful life? People don't want to be moving around from place to place, and that's a whole, like, moving in itself is already like frustrating, and for people to then have to look out of town, out of state sometimes, it's become, like you said, even with your assessments, it's always rising to the top. I feel like almost every conversation I've had with grantees, it comes back to housing, even with like staffing issues, and they're like, the staff that we have need places to live, or they are getting priced out of their neighborhoods and they're going to move, and we're going to lose this staff person because they don't want to have to commute. It's so interrelated regardless of the sector. Exactly.
Well, I think we're working on this food pantry project, right? We're building out a brand new food pantry. It's going to be awesome. Part of the reason we're doing that is because we've served 5 or 6 times the amount of food that we used to serve like before the pandemic. And so we've got tons and tons more people coming through the door. And maybe at the start of the pandemic, it was a lot of people were laid off in the service sector and they were really struggling. But now I think the uptick is more attributable to people like, my rent's $1,400. It used to be $1,000. I was barely making it at $1,000. Now at $1,400, I have to cut every corner I can. So now I come to the food pantry and that saves me from going to the grocery store once a month. So I save $200 on that. And then, I switched from going to Dunkin' Donuts to making my own coffee a couple times a week. Like, everybody's saving $8 here and $12 there, so that they can get to that rental number. And for a lot of people, they're paying more than like half their income in rent. So it has to come out of all these other areas. So it does interfere with just about everything in life.
And when people are in that cycle of basically using almost all of their income for rent, how can we get on the path to home buyership or home ownership when all of their money is going to rent and they can't save for that down payment? It's like they're already paying a mortgage monthly. They've proven that they can pay that mortgage monthly through that rent price, but how can they save for a down payment that, even if it's 3%, with the price of houses right now, 3% is still a ton of money to have nested to put, never mind if it's 5% or 10% or 20%, as is usually noted. It's how are we going to help get single people, families out of this cycle when there's no way you can save, that you can't be expected to?
Yeah, I mean, you have to feel just as fortunate as I do. A few years ago, we bought a house, you bought a house. Kind of before all this. I think you were like a year or two ahead of me even.
And 2017 just made 5 years.
Yeah, so we were 2019.
Yesterday.
So we're,
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Actually, us too. I think it was May 3rd was the
May
closing date or something.
That's so funny.
So we're 2 years apart in that sense. But 2019, May of 2019 might have been the last time that could have happened for me.
Wow.
Not only would we not be able to even find a house now, but the cost would go crazy.
Yeah.
Just the equity in the house in the last couple of years has grown like crazy.
Yes.
And so if like the middle class dream is buying your own home and then getting that equity, a lot of people are not able to do it, even though financially they're paying probably your mortgage or my mortgage in rent.
Right.
Except like I have a nice backyard and a driveway and a quiet neighborhood, and not that that's everybody's preference, but there are people in third floor walk up apartments in not the best part of the city or whatever, and that's a struggle. So it's definitely tough for people. And I think it's just widening the gap because it's a regressive thing, right? Everybody has to pay housing costs.
Yes.
And so the people who are already with limited incomes bear the brunt of it, and the people with higher incomes are fine, right?
Right.
It's the same with everything else. It's the same with gas prices.
Yep.
It's the same with the cost of food. If you're making a lot more money, maybe you're saving a little less than you did before, but you're still saving. Whereas other people don't have anywhere to get the money from to cover the added cost of these things.
Yeah, it is. It's just deepening this class divide. And I think you maybe had even referenced it in your session, but that it's so expensive to be poor.
Yeah.
And that it's just all of these added things. And when you are having to make the decision between a bill and another bill, or your rent and certain opportunities for your kids, it's heartbreaking to think of the choices that families have to make just to be able to have shelter. Like a very basic need, and we call them basic needs for a reason. And when you look at what our current minimum wage is, and I'm sure so many people have seen the infographics that are like, there is nowhere in the country that you can afford rent with what the minimum wage is federally. In Massachusetts is slightly higher, but still the purpose of a minimum wage is to be able to live minimally, and it's not doing that, and it's just perpetuating the gaps in a person's different areas of life.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's true. It's just seen everywhere. And to be clear, right, this is new to New Bedford. We're just kind of grappling with some of this stuff, but in a lot of ways, it's a problem across the state, and it's a problem across the country. I think part of it is the baby boomer generation are continuing to live in their houses, and they're working longer, so they're living longer. Everything's going longer. And now you've got the millennial generation that's knocking on the door looking to move into these houses, and they can't. So they're staying in apartments, and they're clogging up those apartments for other people who would normally move into them. But you made the point earlier, too, like even the people with money, even the people who the rent is not a problem for, can't find units. And they're competing against each other for units. What chance does someone who isn't making, 70, 80 grand a year, what chance do they have of even getting in the door? Yeah, it's really difficult.
And when you have landlords, even if they're nice, kind people, but if they're looking at applications for both and they see that someone's making $80K a year and they see that someone's making $35K a year, who are they going to choose just based off of that when they have dozens and dozens of applications to choose from? And I can't say that you can fault them, but again, it's just putting those other people behind in this race.
Well, I don't own any rental property, but if I did, I would find that to be difficult, right? Like I have to pay the mortgage. I bought this as an investment for like my family. I want to be able to manage it as simply as possible. And I want to make sure that the tenant can pay the rent because I don't want to deal with not having that problem. So they're acting only in their own interest, and I don't know. It seems logical. So it's a systemic problem. It's not the individuals doing it, So I don't know. If I gave you a magic wand and said, like, solve New Bedford's housing challenges, what comes to mind? Where would you start?
I would say, and money's not an issue with the magic wand.
No, plenty of money.
Okay, great. I would say we need to fix, there are vacant buildings that could be fixed into housing, or current housing that's not viable for people to live in. That could be redone. I think there's just like the number needs to be greater. There needs to be more places for people to live.
Yep.
And also I think the wages need to be higher. People need to be able to make more money. Again, I don't think that people should have to spend half of their income, but making more money would make things easier for folks. But I think just the number issue, and you were talking about that in your talk the other day, like how many just units there are, and that compared to the growth, or just compared to over the past few years, what the usual growth is in other cities, and how ours has not grown at that amount.
Yep.
And more people are being born, more people are moving here. I was talking to a friend who, she was asking me for opinions on different areas, because she's like, oh, we're looking to buy a house in New Bedford. I'm like, I love you, but I'm like, we need our houses.
New Bedford people.
I'm like, New Bedford people only. She's like, I would be living there though. I was like, okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
But yeah, I think that the amount of housing, the improving the quality, and it's like, not to go on a tangent with public health, but that's such the quality of life of living in a safe, nice house with clean water, with no lead paint, with nice windows, with a nice view, with sidewalks that aren't crumbled, that you feel safe walking around, that you know your neighbors. Like, all of that adds to someone's quality of life, and it's really a public health issue on top of all these other economic issues. Yeah. And I think that just being able to raise your children in a way, and for those children to have a safe home, somewhere to do their homework, somewhere to play with their siblings, somewhere to feel safe and be able to go to school and focus on school and not think about home and things like that. It's just, again, everything is just so interconnected. It's hard for me to like pinpoint on like one specific area that I think needs help. And the other thing is gentrification and like wanting people who are here and maybe do own homes or live in certain areas to not be priced out and not be forced to move out. People have been here historically for years. I always think when talking about gentrification, it's like, people who live here deserve the nice things. Why can't we make things nicer and just not push people out? Like, why can't we have nicer trees planted, community centers, restaurants, but not get rid of the people who live here? The people who've always been here should be able to stay and enjoy those things. And that's what causes gentrification. Things get nice, they get pushed out, new people move in, and it's a whole different culture of the neighborhood. Yeah, I think it's undeniable that some of that's happening, right? Mm-hmm. So there are definitely people that are being priced out of living here, and they're going and they're doing different things because they can't afford to live the way that they always lived. At the same time, I feel like the word gentrification has become like the third rail. Like, nobody wants to say it. It's got all this added like weight to it, right? When people say it. So people either avoid it as naming the problem, or it means something different to different people, I've noticed. But I think your definition of it just there is pretty sharp, right? It's the idea that people are priced out. There's a cultural aspect of it. So people we culturally understand as like New Bedford natives, the way that we are, can't afford to live in New Bedford anymore. And then they go to some other community and sort of disrupt that community too. There's obviously always going to be some movement between communities, but I don't know. That's a really difficult problem to get into. Sometimes I don't know if anyone's pro gentrification that clearly, but like some of the activism I've seen, about gentrification gets into these like pitfalls sometimes of like, you can't make anything better because gentrification is going to happen. Right. And that's tough for me too, because like I want better. I want the city to come up, and I want to be proud of it. So that's what I'm saying. It's like, can things get better and people just still be able to live there? Like, people here afford. People here deserve nice things. Yeah. And that's what happens. The nice things happen, or take place, or are built, and then they're pushed out. Why can't the people who are always here get to enjoy the nice things that come as a city progresses and grows? Yeah, it's pretty dispiriting if we're like, all the work that we're doing to try to make things better. We should slow that down, because it's, it's causing that. But I think trying to figure out ways to bring income up is a big part of it. I think buying people more time. So if you have a better housing stock, you have more units that are available. That should I presume help.
And then I think some of it is just having people who own some of these rental properties that care about that problem. So
Yes.
they might not choose the highest income applicant from Boston over a slightly less income person from New Bedford. They might just go like, they're from here, they're going to be more successful.
Yep.
So thinking about that a little differently would be good too. But the progress should continue. The city looks great. It's looked as good as I can ever remember it looking right now. We have more cool stuff happening than ever before, but doing what we do professionally, sometimes I see these things and I'm like, oh man, it's gonna be a big problem for the people paying $800 in that neighborhood.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. And
It's
I wish
tricky.
more landlords would think that way. Was that your magic wand? Or should I pass the question
no.
back to you? Oh, good.
Oh, yeah,
Pass the one to you.
All right, so my magic wand is going to heat up from all the movement that it's doing in the air. But I think New Bedford needs to figure out a way to, over the next like 5 years, add more than 1,000 units of housing, which requires a really, 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 really aggressive strategy to build housing. Because I think in the last decade, New Bedford has built like less than, we'll say 500 units of housing. I think it's quite a bit less than that. I think if you compared present day number of housing units in New Bedford to what it was in like 2010, I would hazard a guess that it's less, that there are less units available than there were a decade ago. And when you compare that to a city that's developing like Worcester, or even, I have trouble comparing us to like greater Boston cities, but if you look at Quincy or Cambridge, they've got more units. And I think we're playing catch up. So if I were to wave the magic wand, I would say, let's figure out how to get to like 1,000 new units in 5 years. And that means 200 new units a year, which means like 4 or 5 big housing developments every year. The only way to build at that scale is to make it super appealing for developers, which comes with its own trade-offs that you have to make. It does entail developing affordable housing at a scale that New Bedford really hasn't done in recent memory. And by affordable housing, I mean units that cost like $1,200 a month. I'm not saying we don't need more public housing units and housing units for seniors and income restricted units, but the typical affordable unit is just based on like someone who gets 60% of the area median income gets one rent. But those rents are actually fairly competitive with the market rate. So $1,200 is fine. There might be some units going for $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 right now, which is a little crazy. But the $1,200 unit is not the $300 public housing unit. But I think a lot of people can't really grasp that. They think affordable means like heavily subsidized. Not the case. But it's the only way to build these projects because they need tax credits and they need all kinds of other stuff. So we've been resistant to build that, I think, in New Bedford for one reason or another. And I think we need to like open up the faucet on that and just go crazy with it. That's the only way to do it. We need to build market rate units too, so paying the full price of whatever the market will rent. But those projects are harder to finance because the market rent isn't that high here. It is compared to what we've paid, but compared to Boston, it's like still half. So why would you build something here when you could build it there?
Right. And make twice as much.
Yeah, the wood and the nails and all that stuff costs about the same no matter where you put it. The construction's a little bit more expensive because of the labor rates are higher, but it's not that much more expensive to build something in Boston than it is here. And yet we would expect a developer to make those choices to come here. It's just not going to happen. So building 1,000 new units in 5 years or 3 years or whatever, something like that is part of it. I think we're like 2,000 or 3,000 units short. So that's what we should be focused on. You've heard me, talk about this, but I think displacing some of the big landlords that own like hundreds of properties that are maybe not always the most responsible landlords, or their strategy wasn't to be like to knock it out of the park as landlords. It was just to own property and generate revenue. Whether that's PACE or other agencies kind of doing some of that. I think there's a role for the nonprofit sector and the public sector to play in buying those houses up rather than letting them go to outside investors. Keeping the rents at reasonable rates or making them reasonable, $1,200, $1,000. Maybe a one-bedroom unit for $800 would be really great. There's a lot of people in the market for that. I think that could be done for hundreds of units, and that's like almost cheating to solve the problem because you're taking stuff you already have. It's a lot cheaper to do it that way, and it's a lot quicker to do it that way.
Yes.
Because building units takes a lot of time and a lot of money, but just buying the ones that already exist and making sure the rents are good, not so much. Still a lot of money, but not. It's like a quarter of the price to build new units. So that would be, and that's what we're working on as our real wand solution here. But magic is to get everybody else to do new development at scale. The short-term plan to preserve affordable housing, I think we can execute. But
and what would you respond to people who are like, where are we putting those?
Like new developments? I think you have to get kind of crafty there, right? I think there's a lot of, I'm just learning all this stuff myself, but they call it like infill projects. So you take a building like the registry building across from where we are right now. I'm trying to see, can you see it out the window? No. The window through the window. You take a building and you would basically like fill that gap in and build up. I think there's a lot of potential to do that downtown. There's another project like that down the street from there. Some of the old mill buildings could still be developed. There's still some vacant space around. A plan like that might rely on taking sites like old school buildings that are closed or old churches that are closed and demolishing what's there and building up. I think there's been enough vacant land and not enough development here that we haven't gotten to this step yet. But there is a version of this where you would buy up like 3 or 4 houses that exist, knock those down, and then build like a complex, right? But we haven't needed to do that because there's been enough available land when we've needed it. There's like the Morse Twist drill site. There's a site in the north end, like off of Dean Street. I forget what that's called, but there's a big vacant lot there. I live near the airport, and I drive down that little access road by the airport all the time. And I like having the airport. I love seeing the planes land and everything. But I do look at it and go, like, you could probably put 10,000 houses in here. Like, what are we doing? I'm sure it's not that simple, but I do look at it and go, like, how many housing units could you put in here? What would that do to tax rates and stuff if you had people living in there? But that's a real magic wand. Like, we're gonna have a new airport somewhere else on an airplane carrier we'll put in Clark's Cove, and we'll do that instead. But where you put them is important. Changing, like, you have to be careful that you don't gentrify while you're trying to solve the gentrification problem. So I'm mindful of that too.
And I think there are so many opportunities for people, like, in conversations again that I have more personally, like, so many people want to be able to buy a house and be able to transition from being in an apartment to owning a home. And I think they're missing out on, like you said, this opportunity that we were able to get 5 years ago. Like, will there ever be that type of transition and pathway for them to easily be able to be homeowners? It's like you said, cliche of the American dream, but a lot of people do have that dream. They want to own homes, and so where can they go?
Well, I don't know if you thought about this when you were buying your house in 2017, but maybe you bought your house and you were thinking like this was your starter house, and someday you'd move on to another one, and maybe that'd be like around now, and so you're looking at it and you're going, well, I could sell this house and I get a ton more money than I paid for it. But then I'd have to go and buy another house for a crazy amount of money, and maybe that's not a great decision either, because I feel that way.
I said that, like I said, the 4th to a few days ago was our house anniversary, and I was like, doesn't look like we're moving anywhere with this market, so let's continue making this house our home, and we'll be hosting for many, many more years, because I'm not going anywhere.
You could sell it overnight, but you can't move anywhere else.
Oh yeah, we get postcards like every day. Like, we get texts. People want to buy in your neighborhood. I'm like, where can I go? And I know someone who, like, they had the opportunity with their to move in with their in-laws who have like a lot of land, have a huge house, and they moved in and they sold their house for a great price, and they have kids and they're living with their grandparents, and so it's a win-win for them.
That's all, like, so that's like the building wealth middle class dream, right? Is to have those options.
Yes.
And until you're in the game with
Yes.
something that you own, you don't
Yes.
get to play the game.
Yes.
So it really is tough. One of the things I've been talking about this week is there's all these first-time homebuyer programs, but they are not well utilized. Like Mass Housing, like if someone's watching this and this is of interest, Mass Housing has a first-time homebuyer program that provides up to $50,000 in down payment and like startup assistance in buying a house. And there's income guidelines that are fairly generous on that one. The city has a plan that's just through the city's Office of Housing and Community Development. It's a little harder to, I don't want to say harder to access, but the eligibility criteria is tighter. But that's a big one too. Like not enough people know about these programs. I wish I knew about them because maybe we would have been eligible a few years ago to get something of that.
Right.
Yeah. The city one, the problem that people have is that in order to get approved for a mortgage, you have to make some money, right? But in order to be eligible for the program, you can't make too much money.
Yep.
So it's a very narrow
Yes.
spot. Some of the houses that Pace has developed, we sell to a first-time home buyer through like a lottery process. In order to be in the lottery, you have to qualify. So you have to be eligible to get the mortgage, and you have to be income eligible to get that type of mortgage and be in the lottery. And I think the last 2 houses we've done like that, there's only been one person that was in the lottery. So it's like,
here's your house.
there's no doing the wheel. Oh, it's one ball in the wheel going around. Congratulations.
Wonder who it is.
Yeah. But it's a shame that more people aren't taking advantage of those programs because that could be a differentiator.
And Youth Build does such an amazing job with renovating.
Youth Build's awesome. They do a great job in general. Definitely. Yeah. So this has been a great conversation. Assuming all the technology has worked, I think it's been a good idea to do this.
Yeah.
Before we sort of wrap it up, it's a Friday afternoon, so it was a good test drive, a good time to do it. Is there anything you're working on or excited about right now that you want to talk about?
So with Island specifically, we are focusing a lot on still housing needs, education, and currently, especially with the Women and Girls portfolio, Roe versus Wade, seeing how our grantees are reacting, any strategies that are coming out of it, and what we can do to support it, support our grantees, support the people that they serve. So I've been doing like a ton of research and talking to majority of our Women and Girls grantees to see like what's next, how can we support them. I think that as a funder, it's our responsibility to listen to the experts and then see what we can do and not think that we should be leading the way, or of course if people are looking for suggestions, but to fall back and listen and then see how we can help. And we've also been, nothing has come out of it yet, so I won't say too much, but working with our fellow funders on just thinking of other ways to support nonprofits. And so we've all been kind of talking to, we have some overlapping grantees, but we have different grantees in different areas that we serve. So talking with each other and seeing what are the best ways that, again, as funders, we can show up. Is it trainings? Of course, funding is always, but that aside, like what other ways can we support our grantees and help them support the community? And so we've been looking at different collaborative ways, co-funding opportunities. And I think that, like you said, you kind of said this earlier, like Boston has like a ton of funders. Down here, we don't have as many, but all the more reason for us to work together and try to stretch out our resources, our expertise, and really be able to help our grantees in a stronger way.
Exactly. Well, it sounds really great. I think it's exciting. My PACE plug, right, is that we've got programs in all these different areas, and we've got the infrastructure to support all kinds of cool stuff. And we have some funding that's flexible. Most of it's not. Most of it's very prescriptive. But I like to say we're like the place that can make like these dreams happen. So anytime someone has a really good idea and like a well-articulated plan, sometimes those ideas need a place to live. And I think we're equipped to do a lot of those. So that's it. We're always the place. And you know that because people may or may not know this, but Rayana is like Pace's like lineage is built right in. So Rayana's aunt is the fuel assistance director. Rayana's mom is a star in our housing program. She's probably personally distributed, I don't know, $3 million in rental assistance in the last 2 years, saving hundreds of tenancies with the Housing Opportunity Center team. You used to run through the office as a little girl, so you're back here today for this. But
that's great. I appreciate you having me, and professionally and personally, a big fan of what PACE does.
Thank you very much.
Such a vital part of the community.
We have a role to play. It's our responsibility to do it. So I'm glad that we're living up to the sort of the promise these days, and we'll continue that good work. But we wouldn't be able to do it without you and the Island Foundation and the other funders that support that work, and really more than just fund it, but help think through the challenges and identify the needs in the community and work on them together. Because being coordinated and being like strategic and smart about how we do it works a whole lot better than just like throwing money at stuff. So some of our most impactful programs cost nothing, or the most impactful things we do, like this podcast, right? Like, let's see, I think the microphones cost $100, and the camera's kind of multi-purpose, but that was probably $400. I don't know if we can count the furniture because the room was already set up. So this is like essentially free. And maybe it catches someone's ear who decides like, I'm going to come and build 120 units of housing in New Bedford. Or there's a policymaker that listens and says, like, we need to really open up the doors of opportunity here for housing, building housing, or providing rentals, or whatever it is. So hopefully there's an impact to that. And so we have these $1 million programs, and those do great jobs too. But sometimes it's just thinking and talking together. So thank you for being willing to do that. Rayana Grace, Island Foundation Program Officer. What's your website?
IslandFDN.org.
IslandFDN.org. Check them out, and stay tuned for more. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yay.
All right. Cool.